Total Retail Talks listeners are invited to the 2026 Women in Retail Leadership Summit, held April 27th through the 29th at the JW Marriott Miami Turnberry Resort. Connect with senior retail leaders and gain new perspectives shaping the future of the industry. Register today at womeninretailsummit.com and save $100 with code PODCAST.
Welcome to Total Retail Talks, your podcast channel for retail knowledge.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Talks. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail, and I'm excited to be joined on today's episode by Mike Natenshon, who is the founder and CEO of Marine Layer. We're going to talk to Mike about the growth of that apparel brand. It's got some interesting stories, a little bit about the history of the brand, but also bringing us to present day and talking a little bit about where Marine Layer is today and a little bit about where it's going in the future. So really looking forward to the conversation, and thanks for joining me today, Mike.
I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to talking shop a little bit.
So let's go all the way back to the beginning and tell me about the kind of the founding of Marine Layer. Tell me, the story that got the brand started, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's been a minute, but almost 15 years ago now, I had this old favorite shirt from college that was just perfect. It was broken in, fit just right. Like, everybody has 100 shirts and a few of them sort of rise to the top and are just right. And mine was on its last legs. And, my girlfriend at the time was basically like, it's me or the shirt. And she went on to be my wife. So I think she carried a lot of weight there. And so I had to get rid of it, and I just couldn't find anything in the market that was like that sort of old favorite shirt. And I had just left a job in finance and didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had moved out to the Bay Area and was sort of in love with like the California lifestyle that I was living. And so I just went down to LA and started learning about textiles and was basically just naive enough and maybe a little stubborn enough to try and make a shirt myself. And turns out making a t-shirt is a lot harder than I realized. I think it's always, if you're making something custom, it's quite challenging. We could have bought blank American Apparel shirts or alternative apparel shirts at the time, but then you're not really doing something different. So I really wanted to develop a new fabric that felt really soft and broken in right out of the gates and had a very specific idea of what I wanted. And that took over a year and some credit card debt to get off the ground. But I made a run of shirts and I was just selling them in my apartment in Russian Hill in San Francisco and just to friends and family at first, but people like really loved the shirts. And we had this logo that was kind of based on this like relaxed California lifestyle. And that just, we were off and running from there.
Was it kind of just like a side gig when you got it off the ground? Because you didn't necessarily have that typical retail or merchandiser background working with product. You came from a little bit of a different route to
Totally.
it, right, Mike?
Yeah, which, served me well because I had zero knowledge of anything in the industry up front. I was like Googling knitting mills in California, and that, it's a very opaque business. So I had to knock on a lot of doors and just kind of figure it out every step of the way. But that served me well because I didn't have any preconceived notions, and I just had kind of a passionate curiosity and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But sometimes starting from scratch is a good way to do it. And, I was fortunate. I was in business school at the time and somewhat disenchanted with that process. Like, people, had all these classes they were teaching me about like theoretically how to start a business and everything and writing these elaborate business plans. And it seemed very theoretical. And at the same time, I was going down to LA and trying to actually make a shirt. And I was learning so much just on the ground. And so I think business school was great for some avenues, but I think when it comes to entrepreneurial efforts, just going out there and trying to do it really served me well.
Yeah. What better way to learn than diving headfirst into it and getting started, right? That's kind of the route you took. I believe you had kind of a co-founder that you worked with at the start of the brand. That's still, I believe, involved in the brand. Tell us a little bit about your work with Adam Lynch, one of your co-founders, and tell us how you two got connected to grow this business of Marine Layer.
Yeah, well, Adam, 6th grade, we started hanging out together. Not really talk a lot about t-shirts. That was, he's basically been my best friend for the last 30 7 years or something like that. We grew up together in Massachusetts and moved out to California around the same time. Both had kind of that, like, sounds trite, but like chasing that California dream a little bit. We'd been living on the East Coast and wanted to try something different. And there was this idea of sort of freedom and the beach and all these moments of, that kind of like shaped the brand. And he was just always like a thought partner. You have those friends that you can kind of talk to about stuff and just chew the fat. And I'm very much like a external processor. So I'm like, well, what do you think about this? And, he was working in finance at the time, and Bonobos, obviously probably familiar with that brand, but they started like a year or two before I did. And that was like the model in my mind that we were going to be online only. Like they were, sort of going to be the next Zappos or something. It was all digital. So I spent a lot of time building a website and got that experience up, but it wasn't really doing that well. We were just like, I was, anecdotally would talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I think I've seen your site and it looks cool, but people weren't buying anything. And at the time, this was sort of right after one of the retail apocalypses. There are many of them, 2010, 11. There were some vacancies on Chestnut Street in San Francisco, which is a big retail corridor. And there was this little hair salon. It's like 500 square feet. And basically I just reached out to the broker and I was like, hey, I was a little bit bullshitting him. I was like, yeah, we're really interested in opening up a retail space. Can we do a temporary lease to just test it out? And we had no intention of opening a retail space. We just wanted to do it to collect email addresses, right? I was still sort of on this digital only path. And we sort of convinced him to give us a 1 month short-term lease. We had to like co-sign it, personally guarantee it. It's funny. I say we just because that was when I was starting the business. I wanted to sound a little bit more serious. It just wasn't me. So I always said we, but at the time it was just me, and Adam was kind of helping me on the side. And I was like, hey, I got this space. Like I need some help. Can you help me out for a little while? And he was like, sure. Cause he was kind of getting into it. That was like the real parlay that changed the fate of our business, because he hopped on and that store ended up being much more successful than we thought. We had this great custom fabric and very tactile experience. People could come into the space and experience the brand. We had like a shuffleboard table, and what we thought was going to be a pop-up, we just were like, I don't know, should we sign this lease for, it was $7,000 a month, which was an incredible amount of money. We were trying to figure out how many t-shirts we needed to sell to do that, and sign that lease. And I was like, I can't do this alone. Do you want to join? And much to my surprise, he said yes. And more importantly, his fiance at the time said yes. So that kind of put us on this fun path that was very different from most brands. I think a lot of brands start and they try and are doing like cost-effective wholesale, right? You're trying to get distribution from other channels and or trying to do it online. And we were sort of bucking that trend, and we just opened up a retail store, and that, we saw the power of retail very early.
Yeah, and we're gonna touch on that theme of I like to how you phrase that, the power of retail, because that's continuing to be an important channel of distribution for your brand. I want to go back. You said nearly 15 years, so not an insignificant amount of time that Marine Layer has been around.
Yeah.
There's obviously, some inflection points, some pivotal decisions, some milestones over that course of that time. Tell me a little bit about what in your mind springs to the top when you think about how you've grown from this kind of small entrepreneurial project of yours to now you're this nationally recognized brand.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first inflection point of stumbling onto the retail experience and, getting my best friend to join. And then, we were able to raise a little bit of money from friends and family. San Francisco, we're fortunate. This is a very like tech investor driven community, and people, I think, they invest in restaurants and wanted to support a local brand. So we were able to raise a little bit of money, which was helpful because we didn't have, the economics starting early don't really work. If you have one retail store and we're making all this product in San Francisco, our first t-shirts cost like $25 to make, that wasn't, so we weren't going to price them at $125, but I always felt like we just needed a little bit of capital to kind of build the brand the right way, where we could price it at the right spot. And so we were fortunate enough to get, some friends and family money. And I think that was kind of like the next little bit that allowed us to open up another store in San Francisco and Hayes Valley, and kind of a second proof point. I feel like if this podcast was 12 hours long, we could go through all the little inflection points that have happened along the way. But if I had to summarize it all, I was actually talking to one of the Bonobos guys right at the beginning, and or maybe I was listening to an interview from, I just, the one thing that I remembered was just like make small mistakes. And that always stuck with me because we made every mistake, from producing, I spelled cotton incorrectly on the first round of shirts that we made, which, on the heat press. And, Adam pointed that out. So I knew he'd be a good business partner at that time when he caught that I had, spelled catan instead of cotton on the back. But it wasn't like we made 50,000 shirts and that was an irreconcilable problem. You learn and you iterate. And I just feel like that's kind of what we've been doing. We've had a very sort of steady growth pattern. I think our compound annual growth rate probably isn't very different from our yearly growth rate. We've grown about 25 or 30% per year, sometimes more a little bit, sometimes a little bit less, but it's been a nice sort of cadence to build a brand that I think hopefully will be around for a long time.
Yeah. One of the themes as you're talking, Adam, that I'm picking up is it's really kind of the emotional. Well, obviously you're invested emotionally in the brand, but kind of the value in terms of the personal relationships too. Obviously, you and Adam have been buddies you grew up together, right? So that relationship, but you've kind of carried that over, I think, to the relationship that you have with your customers, your investors at the start of the business. Tell me a little bit about how that philosophy in terms of like creating and prioritizing that human connection, even today, like as we think about, obviously there's so much hype around AI and automation and how things can be digitally done. And obviously there's a certainly a place for that, but you also don't want to neglect kind of that human connection that you have. Tell us a little bit of how you think about that philosophy, and especially as it relates to your relationships with your customers at Marine Layer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like dates back to, I've always had a little bit of a sort of rebellious side where I like to push back and play the foil to what, these old tropes. And I remember when I was thinking about working with Adam, my girlfriend at the time was like, don't work with friends. That's the number one thing you shouldn't do, but I was like, I don't know. I think we have the right relationship that can work. And it ended up, it has worked phenomenally. And it sort of started to shape this idea that like personal investment in what you're doing and the people you're working with can be a really valuable thing, right? Like I think people tend to think about what happens when it goes wrong, but this is my best friend for 35 years, so it just couldn't go wrong, right? We had to invest enough in our disagreements to make sure we treated each other respectfully and figured out how we could resolve conflicts. And we brought a lot of friends and folks into the mix along the way. And there's just something that sort of builds on that. And I think it's shaped our retail fleet really as well, right? Like we always used to talk about some of these, like, we were just like, how come you can walk into a Trader Joe's anywhere in the country and like you tend to meet like a good guy, or like the person checking you out is a nice guy and sort of seems into it. We're like, how do they replicate this? And I think what we've found is just that it builds on itself, right? Our head of retail that we hired was this great woman that came from Levi's and really liked the brand. And, she was just awesome. And she hired awesome people. Like if you hire assholes, they're probably going to hire other assholes, right? But I think it sort of stems from that way. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the really low turnover rate we have at both our corporate office and also in the fleet. And I think, we tend to value our folks and, like you said, sort of those personal relationships, but that's really served our business well.
Which actually, I'm going to build on that with a question I have around, and you mentioned it, that, that first physical storefront in San Francisco, obviously you've grown and expanded that physical footprint since. As you continue to scale and grow your store count, how do you ensure that each one of the stores that you're opening is preserving that kind of, you want to create that same environment and wants to be, that personal experience that people are getting once they step foot in one of the Marine Layer stores? How do you do that? Obviously hiring's a big piece of that, your operations, obviously the product, but tell us a little bit about your thoughts as you continue to grow on brick and mortar, keeping that kind of same core experience.
Yeah, I think we have a philosophy that we want to treat our customer. We want our customer to feel like they're buying something from a friend, right? Like their cool friend that they're going to for clothing advice or something like that. I think that's always shaped how we train folks, how we hire, how we shape the customer experience. Like our brand is very laid back and, we make clothes for the weekend, right? Like no one's dying on the operating table in what we're doing. That's what, when I was always stressed out, my wife would say that. She's like, you guys are still making t-shirts for the weekend, right? So there's some perspective there that's like, we try to be pretty laid back about how we approach things. And the irony is that takes a lot of work, but I think it comes through in our customer experience where it's like, how can we almost obsess about how we can make that customer experience really easy, whether it's, we have a 365-day return policy, you don't need a receipt, you don't need anything. We've always felt like free shipping is important, and just, free returns, and we just try to make it easy. Like, we're not sort of playing to the lowest common denominator. We envision that we're selling to our friends, right? And that has helped kind of ensure that experience, I think, across the fleet.
I want to talk about the product a little bit because I read somewhere, and as this kind of was pitched to me, one of the things you describe yourselves as is fabric nerds, right? That you guys
Yeah.
are really obsessed over the product and over the materials that you're using, obviously curating what you believe is the perfect t-shirt. And I know you've expanded into different products besides t-shirts, but tell me a little bit about that, what that process looks like internally, that level of craftsmanship that you believe can differentiate Marine Layer in a very crowded market where you're fighting for the consumers' wallets.
Yeah, I think, again, I feel like a bit of a broken record, like tracing back a lot of our philosophies now to the early stage, but there really is a through line there. And I wanted a shirt that was very particular, and I think that there aren't too many elements to a t-shirt, right? Like, the fabric is a huge part of it. So that very early on was something that I felt was really important. And it's like an important lever that we could use to get the product just the way that we want it. I think as we've expanded, we have a full line of men's and women's, we make 400 SKUs a season.
Mm-hmm.
We still want everything to kind of fit and feel like your old favorite shirt. And that requires really getting the fabric right. We want everything in our store to be incredibly soft, whether it's, a heavier jersey, maybe we have to suede it a little bit more to do that. Or we want a sweatshirt to look like your old favorite. That often involves like a unique pigment dye process, so it has a little bit more of a fade to it, right? So there's all these elements of the fabric and the development process that allow us to really hit specific targets for whatever product we're making that hopefully lets it stand out in the marketplace.
Does that lend itself to a little bit longer? And I'm sure this might be thought and baked into kind of processes, a little bit of a longer of a production lead time as you think versus maybe some other players.
It lends itself to a lot more headaches. I think, we've got
That's an
yeah,
easier way, right?
right. No, we got over 100 custom fabrics, and, fabric, like, it's a very human process, knitting fabric. So, each lot or each roll of fabric has different shrinkage. So there's a lot of different things there's a lot of added challenges in working with different fabrics. I remember we were always so jealous of Rothy's, that shoe brand, because they just had like one thing. We were just like, this would be so easy. I'm sure they had, the grass is always greener, but they just had one material that they were using. And your greatest strength is also a bit of a shadow, right? Like, the fabric creates a lot of challenges, but what I always tell the team is, like, when we're in the midst of it and dealing with all these headaches, it's like, if you want to make something special, it's probably going to be hard, right? Like, if it were easy, then everybody would be making it. So I think that's kind of the mindset that we take, and it's a bit of a labor of love, but hopefully that shows through in the product.
How do you think about embracing technology, whether it's around production processes, whether it's different facets of the business, could be, the customer experience that we talked about, or, demand forecasting, inventory, whatever the case may be, to not cut corners necessarily, but make yourselves potentially more efficient. How does that, because it is kind of that labor of love, like you said, so you don't want to lose that, but you also have to, try to operate as efficiently, I imagine, as possible.
No, totally. There's a lot of stuff we're talking about. There's kind of an analog feel to our brand and the aesthetic that's built on like a nostalgic view of this California dream. And we want to hold on to that, but it's also, we're a modern brand. And I think that we approach technology as a valuable way to eliminate problems for our customer. Like, we use New Store for our endless aisle POS system. And that's, just to be able to pull shirts so you can come online and we get stand up inventory from all 55 of our stores. That makes for a better customer experience, right? Like, that is, a really valuable, and it's not something that shows up on the customer side of things, but I think there's a lot of like operational efficiencies. We've always valued technology in the back end. And, even in our clothes, right? Like we talk about with our sport line, hidden comfort or hidden tech, right? We're trying to make sure that if you're working out in them, they have anti-odor properties just like a Lululemon shirt and stretch, but it doesn't look like a tech shirt. So I think, there's a value to technology and innovation that we try to apply through all parts of our brand, but it's a little bit hidden or not something we sort of show quite as much.
Yeah, that kind of behind the scenes capacity for your business. So I'll wrap with this, Mike, as we record this in mid-December. Obviously, I'm going to be turning this page to a new year, and that obviously lends itself to the question of what's next. What's to come from Marine Layer in 2026? What are the opportunities that you're really excited about? You've talked about kind of that impressive year-over-year growth. What can we expect from Marine Layer going forward in the new year and even beyond that?
I mean, you can expect me to take a vacation right after holiday. This is a stressful time of year for us.
Some well-deserved time off first.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we're ready for a little break, but we've had a great year. And one of the things that we're really excited about, we launched these 2 pop-up, sort of experiential pop-up concept shops, one in San Francisco and one in New York for the holiday season, built around customizing products. So we have the Custom Club on Fillmore Street in San Francisco and the Patch Bar on Prince Street in New York. They're really cool experiences. They've been really successful, but it's all built around the idea that you can do like custom chain stitching and embroidery on one of our sweatshirts, t-shirts, or sweaters. And we've designed like 100 sort of vintage inspired patches based on all sorts of different things, whatever. And there's some old ski resorts and all sorts of like whimsy little things that kind of give it a personal touch. But those have really been a big hit. And I think we're seeing that people are really value that ability to personalize. And, there's a lot of kind of sameness in the market. So for next year, we're going to try and roll out mini patch bars in 15 of our stores. We're trying to bring that experience to all of our larger doors and give people the opportunity to, like, my favorite shirt is maybe not the same as your favorite shirt, right? Like, so I think that ability to make it personal and really have a strong emotional connection to the product is something that we're excited to expand on in 2026.
Would that functionality be something that potentially could be brought online to the .com site as well?
Yeah, we launched the Custom Club online as well, so you can do it online, and it's great. Everybody, it's like crazy right now. Everybody I see, they're like, "Oh yeah, I got to run in the store, get my husband a chain stitch shirt. I got to figure out what to say to it." But like, I think it's been great for the holiday. But when folks are listening to this in January, I think it's something that we're gonna just continue to build out for the year ahead. I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, something to look forward to from Marine Layer in 2026 and continued growth of the store business as well. So I want to take the opportunity to thank Mike Natenshon, who is the founder and CEO of Marine Layer, for joining me on this episode of Total Retail Talks. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for the time, Mike.
Yeah, me too. And you nailed the pronunciation of my name, which is very rare. So appreciate it. Always fun to talk shop with you.
Well, thank you, Mike. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
All right. See ya.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Talks.
From our sister brand, Women in Retail Leadership Circle. Join the 2026 Women in Retail Leadership Summit, April 27th through the 29th in Miami, Florida. Save $100 with code PODCAST.